Marine bought a $5 shack. What the German Shepherd was guarding left him speechless. The auction had taken less than 10 minutes. A folding table, a rusted microphone, and a stack of papers yellowed from mountain air. When the gavel came down, Evan Cole's name was scribbled beside a number. $5. That was it. No questions, no signatures, no witnesses. Just a man and a shack that no one wanted. By dusk he was driving up a gravel road that wound through the Appalachian foothills, the kind of road that looked like it had been carved by regret. His truck rattled with every rut, his duffel bag shifting against the seat beside him. The engine hummed steady, but his mind didn't. He hadn't slept through a night in almost 2 years. The war still followed him, sometimes in the click of a lighter, sometimes in the sound of rain that felt too much like shell fire. When he reached the ridge, the shack looked worse than the photos. Crooked roofline, warped porch boards, a tin chimney barely hanging on. The last light of day stretched across the clearing, turning everything the color of old copper. Evan killed the engine and stepped out. The air was sharp and cold enough to sting his lungs. Then he froze. There, on the porch, stood a German Shepherd. Male, broad-chested, coat dusted with dirt and scars. No collar, no chain, no movement. Just stillness, so deliberate it almost felt military. The dog's eyes caught the dying light and held it, amber, unblinking, unreadable. Evan didn't reach for his sidearm. He didn't have one anymore. But his body remembered the posture. He lowered his shoulders, kept his hands visible. "Easy," he said quietly. The words came out like muscle memory, the way he used to talk to scared villagers and half-trained recruits. The dog didn't growl, didn't move. The silence stretched between them, thick as smoke. Evan took a slow step forward. The porch creaked under his weight. The dog's ears twitched once, nothing more. Evan's pulse steadied, a reflex drilled into him over years of learning when not to flinch. "I'm not here to take your place," he said. "Just need a roof that doesn't leak too bad." Still nothing. He stopped at the first step, studying the animal. The fur along the shoulder had been shaved at some point. A scar underneath, thin and pale, like a healed knife line. Training scars, not wild ones. His eyes narrowed. Someone had owned this dog once, someone who'd taught it to stand exactly like this. A wind rolled down the hill, carrying the scent of pine and something faint. Smoke, or maybe memory. The dog's head turned slightly toward the door, not toward Evan. A low sound escaped its throat. Not a growl, not warning. More like a signal. Evan's instincts flared. He eased to the side of the porch and peered through the gap in the doorway. The air inside was thick, unmoving. Dust motes caught the light like ash. And then he heard it. A faint noise, high and fragile. Whimper. He froze. The dog stepped forward, blocking the doorway. Not toward him, but between him and whatever was inside. Evan lifted both hands. "All right," he whispered. "You're not alone." The dog didn't blink. His tail was still, but the muscles along his back shifted, ready. Evan could see now the ribs beneath the fur, the uneven breathing. The animal was exhausted, but he hadn't abandoned his post. Evan slowly crouched, resting one knee on the ground. "You guarding someone in there?" A sound answered him. A rustle, soft and uncoordinated. He leaned slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse through the half-open door. Inside, in the dim corner of the shack, lay a bundle of torn blankets. And from within that bundle came the sound again. A whimper. Then another. 3 tiny shapes, barely moving. Puppies. Evan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Well, damn," he muttered. The shepherd shifted position, not aggressive now, just alert, watching both the man and the doorway. Evan sat back on the porch step and rubbed his jaw. You've been holding this line alone, haven't you? The dog's gaze never left him. The mountain wind pushed through the trees, bending the branches until they whispered. The temperature dropped fast. Evan pulled his jacket tighter and leaned his elbows on his knees. He wasn't sure why, but he started talking. "I was supposed to go south," he said quietly. "Find work near Asheville. But I guess fate wanted me here." The shepherd's ears twitched at the sound of his voice. "I've seen that look before." Evan continued. "The one that says you'll stand here until the world stops spinning. Used to see it in mirrors." For a long time, neither of them moved. Then, as the last of the daylight died, the dog lowered himself onto the porch beside the door. Not sleeping, not trusting, just watching. Evan stared at him for a while, the way he used to study his fellow soldiers during long nights in the desert, trying to read the quiet between heartbeats. There was a steadiness to this animal, something more human than most people he'd met. When he finally looked away, his eyes caught something else near the steps. A rusted tag, half buried in dirt. He picked it up, brushed off the grime. The engraving was faint, but still there. "Axel." He glanced up at the shepherd. "That your name?" The dog didn't move, but his ears tilted forward, just slightly. Evan nodded. "Axel it is." A moment later, thunder rolled in the distance, echoing off the ridge. Axel stood, facing the tree line, his entire body stiffening. Evan turned too. Somewhere below the slope, he saw the faint flicker of headlights cutting through the fog. He felt it before he thought it. Danger. "Guess we're not the only ones who bought this place," he whispered. Axel didn't bark. He stepped off the porch, muscles rippling under his ragged coat, and took position a few feet ahead, between Evan and the unknown. His tail was low, his stance deliberate, the same posture soldiers took before the first shot. Evan's heart began to pound, not from fear but from recognition. Whoever was coming didn't belong here. And somehow, Axel already knew it. The wind howled once more, carrying the metallic scent of rain and something else. Fuel, maybe. Or oil. Evan reached into his bag and pulled out the flashlight he hadn't used in months. He clicked it once, just enough to catch the reflection of two eyes glowing amber in the dark. They weren't human. Axel growled, deep and controlled, the kind that comes from an animal trained to defend, not threaten. Evan rose slowly, every nerve awake. "All right, buddy," he murmured, voice steady. "Looks like it's you and me tonight." In the silence that followed, the forest seemed to lean closer, listening. The first drops of rain began to fall, tapping against the tin roof like distant gunfire. Axel didn't move. Neither did Evan. And on that lonely ridge, under the storm's first breath, a marine and a war dog neither had expected to find drew the same quiet conclusion. This wasn't an accident. They were both guarding something worth fighting for. By morning, the fog rolled in low across the ridge, soft and heavy like a secret trying to stay hidden. Evan woke inside his truck, neck stiff, breath fogging the glass. The memory of the previous night came back sharp. The dog, the stare, the headlights below the hill. He stepped out slowly, boots crunching frost, scanning the tree line. The forest looked calm again, but calm had never meant safe. The shack stood in the pale light, slanted and weary. On the porch, the German shepherd was still there, sitting in the exact same spot as if he hadn't moved all night. Evan almost admired the discipline. The animal's eyes met his. No fear, no curiosity, just quiet calculation. Evan set his duffel down and crouched near the steps, keeping distance. "Morning, Axel," he said, testing the name again. The dog's ears flicked, a faint acknowledgement. Up close, the details were clearer now, the faded scars on his flank, a small tattoo inked inside the ear. Military, That confirmed it. This wasn't a stray, this was a trained K9. Evan's pulse tightened. "Who left you out here?" he murmured. Axel didn't blink. His body carried the posture of a soldier who hadn't been relieved of duty. Evan stood and walked around the cabin's edge, inspecting the perimeter. The dirt was disturbed in even lines, the kind that came from repeated patrol routes. Every few yards he found small prints, axles circling the property like clockwork. That kind of vigilance didn't come from instinct, it came from training and loyalty. He paused near the back wall. A strip of torn fabric hung from a nail, standard issue camo. The edge was burned, edges curled inward. He turned it over in his hand. Faint letters still showed on the Tag L. Grant. Evan frowned. The name scraped against a distant memory. Captain Lewis Grant, the officer who'd pulled him out of a collapsed building in Mosul years ago. Couldn't be. Grant had been listed as missing 2 winters after discharge. Evan stepped back onto the porch, holding the fabric. "Who were you guarding, boy?" Axel's gaze shifted toward the door again. He stood, tail low, posture rigid, but not aggressive. Evan followed the line of his stare. Inside the shack something stirred, a soft, stifled sound. He hesitated. The air smelled of wood rot and cold ash. Then came a small whimper. It wasn't human. Evan pushed the door slightly, the hinge groaning under the weight of rust. Light crept across the dusty floor. Axel moved in front of him, not blocking him entirely this time, just staying close enough to control the situation. In the far corner, behind a collapsed chair and a pile of rags, he saw them. 3 puppies, huddled together, trembling in their sleep. Barely a week old, eyes still closed. Evan froze. Axel stepped forward, lowering himself between the man and the pups. His head turned just enough to show warning. Evan raised a hand. "I get it," he whispered. "You're not guarding the house. You're guarding them." The shepherd's breathing steadied, but his eyes stayed sharp. Something inside Evan cracked open, a feeling he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. Maybe it was respect, maybe envy. The dog had a purpose, a mission. He'd lost his years ago. He looked around the cabin. The remnants of someone's life lingered in every corner, an overturned lantern, an old coffee tin, a cot stripped bare. Whoever had lived here hadn't packed up. They'd vanished, and they'd left the dog behind to finish their duty. Evan moved slowly, stepping back towards the door. "All right," he said softly. "I'll stay outside." He gathered his gear and pitched a small tarp just beyond the porch, facing the cabin. The wind bit through his jacket as he built a small fire. Axel watched every move, silent as stone. When night came, the temperature dropped hard. Frost gathered on the window frames. The pups whimpered now and then, but Axel stayed inside, guarding them with a patience that felt almost human. Around midnight, Evan heard something that snapped him upright. Not the pups this time. A low, rhythmic hum, faint but deliberate, coming from somewhere deep in the woods. He reached for his flashlight and clicked it off immediately, old instincts returning. He crouched low, scanning the darkness. The sound grew clearer. Tires on gravel. A vehicle moving slowly, without headlights. Evan crawled toward the edge of the porch, heart steady but sharp. Axel was already there, staring into the dark, shoulders tight, ears forward. The hum stopped. Silence followed. Then, footsteps. One set, heavy, measured. Whoever it was knew the terrain. Evan whispered, "Stay." Axel didn't move, but the air around him changed, tense like the seconds before a breach. The footsteps reached the tree line, paused, then retreated. Branches cracked. And then, nothing. Just the mountains breathing again. Evan exhaled slowly. He turned to Axel. You knew before I did, he said quietly. The dog shifted, lying down again, but his eyes never closed. By dawn, the frost had thickened into thin ice across Evan's canteen. He packed up the fire and rubbed his hands, glancing at the shack. Axel was still at the door, watching the tree line. The pups stirred inside. Evan thought about the fabric scrap with Grant's name, about the patrol tracks, the night visitor. Too many coincidences for an abandoned mountain shack? He reached into his pocket and fingered the cloth again, feeling the charred edge. Something about this place didn't add up. Someone had trained that dog to protect something far more valuable than a few weeks-old puppies. Axel turned his head suddenly, locking eyes with him. There was understanding there, something almost like command. Evan gave a faint nod. "Okay, soldier," he muttered. "We'll play this your way." And for the first time since the war, he felt something settle in his chest that wasn't fear or loss. It was purpose. He looked towards the cabin one more time. Axel had already returned to his post, lying at the door with quiet pride, his head high, his breath slow and steady. In the heart of that forgotten mountain, the line between man and guardian blurred. And Evan knew, whatever the dog was protecting, it wasn't over yet. The mornings on the ridge came slow. Mist crawled across the ground like breath, seeping into the cracks of the old shack. Evan had stopped counting days since he arrived, but he knew it must have been at least a week. Long enough for Axel to tolerate his presence, long enough for silence to start sounding like company. The man and the dog had found a rhythm. Evan would repair the roof, chop wood, and boil water near the porch. Axel patrolled the boundary, always circling back to the cabin, always checking on the pups. Every night, Evan could hear the dog's steady breathing through the open doorway, deep, even, unshaken. It was the kind of sound that made the darkness feel less hostile. He had begun talking to Axel the way soldiers talk to ghosts, like the words might keep the world from collapsing. "You're a better sentry than most men I knew," he said one morning, tossing him a strip of jerky. Axel caught it mid-air, then sat, chewing slowly, eyes half-narrowed in quiet judgment. The roof leaked badly near the center beam, so Evan decided to climb up and patch it before the next storm. The boards creaked under his weight, brittle from years of neglect. He pried up a rotted plank and froze. Beneath it, buried in a shallow pocket of dust and clay, was something solid. Wood, but smoother, more deliberate. He knelt and brushed away the debris. A small cedar box emerged, edges blackened by time. There was no lock, only a tarnished latch and faint initials carved into the lid. L.G. Evans stared at the letters. His pulse slowed. Lewis Grant. His throat tightened. Captain Lewis Grant, the man who'd saved his life in Mosul. The same officer whose name had been burned into that piece of fabric Axel had led him to. He hesitated for a moment, then unlatched the box. Inside lay a leather-bound field journal, a stack of photographs, and a folded letter sealed in wax. The air inside smelled faintly of oil and pine sap, as if it had been hidden in a hurry. He unfolded the letter first. The handwriting was rough but steady. Evan read aloud, voice barely above a whisper. "If you're reading this, it means Axel did his job. Protect the truth. What we found here was never meant to be buried, but they'll come for it anyway. Trust the dog. He'll know who to trust next." Evan stared at the page, the words crawling beneath his skin. He reached for the photographs. Satellite images, blurred but recognizable. Mountain ridges, dense forest, a few circular clearings that didn't belong. Notes scribbled in the margins. Ground anomaly. Heavy metal concentration. Keep samples secure. He opened the journal. The early pages were routine entries about weather and patrol logs. Then the tone shifted, Grant describing strange machinery appearing deep in the valley. unmarked trucks moving at night, and his growing suspicion that the mining company leasing the land wasn't just digging for minerals. The samples tested hot. One entry read, "Not natural ore, synthetic trace. This isn't extraction, it's disposal." Evan's gut twisted. Disposal. Radioactive waste, buried in an active water table. No wonder the captain had gone missing. He flipped to the last page. A line scrawled across the bottom in fading ink. "Axel knows the perimeter. If I don't make it back, he'll guard it until someone worth trusting comes along." Evan sat back against the wall, the journal heavy in his hands. He looked at Axel through the open doorway. The dog was sitting in the clearing, nose tilted toward the wind, completely still. "Grant sent you here," Evan whispered. "To wait for me?" Axel turned his head slightly, amber eyes catching the light. For a brief second, Evan swore the dog understood. He set the journal aside and unfolded the last sheet of paper in the box, a crude map of the mountain, red circles drawn along the southern ridge. One was labeled Core Site. Another, lower on the map, was marked Tunnel Access. Evan's breath hitched. The same ridge where the headlights had appeared that first night. He felt a rush of adrenaline, the kind that used to come before a mission. It had been years since he'd felt that pulse of purpose. He looked down at the letter again. Protect the truth. A gust of wind rattled the broken shutters. Axel rose suddenly, muscles tightening. He let out a low growl, not of warning, but recognition. Evan followed his gaze toward the valley. Through the haze, a plume of smoke was rising, thin, deliberate, too white for a campfire. Someone was out there. Evan gathered the contents of the box and tucked them under the floorboard again, covering it with loose boards and dirt. He stepped outside, heart pounding. "You see it too, don't you?" he said. Axel's ears stayed forward, his stance ready. Evan looked toward the trees, thinking of the map, of Grant, of the strange hum that had haunted the nights. Maybe this mountain wasn't just forgotten land. Maybe it was a vault, one guarded by a soldier long gone and his loyal dog who refused to abandon the post. He crouched beside Axel. "Looks like your old mission's not over," he said quietly. "And neither is mine." Axel blinked once, then looked back toward the smoke. The man and the dog stood side by side at the edge of the clearing, the cold wind sweeping between them. The ridge stretched wide and silent before them, but Evan could feel the hum under his feet, the faint mechanical vibration of something buried deep below. He didn't know yet what Captain Grant had died protecting. But he knew this. Whatever it was, it had been left in the care of one guardian who'd never quit. And now there were two. The rain came early that morning, steady and cold, washing the ridge in mist. Evan pulled his jacket tighter and walked the perimeter again. Axel padded beside him, silent but alert, head turning at every sound that didn't belong. The mountain had its own rhythm now, and Evan had begun to hear it, the slow breath of the earth beneath his boots, the faint vibration that wasn't just the wind. After finding Captain Grant's letter, Evan couldn't rest. He had to know what the man died protecting. So he started to map the area, line by line, pacing it the way he used to sweep an abandoned compound. He noticed something strange near the northern slope. Fresh soil, recently disturbed, half hidden beneath pine needles. The pattern wasn't random. Whoever had dug there knew exactly where to dig. He knelt, brushing the ground with his hand. Beneath the wet earth was compacted gravel and traces of a metal pipe, small but deliberate, leading down into the ground. Axel growled softly beside him, tail low, nose to the dirt. The dog sniffed, then looked up at Evan, eyes sharp. "Yeah," Evan murmured. "You smell it too." The air carried a faint chemical scent, oil and something metallic, bitter, unnatural. It reminded him of the military dumps he'd guarded overseas. Whatever was under this ridge, it wasn't supposed to be here. By noon, he'd followed the trail of disturbed soil down towards the creek bed. There, half buried under a fallen log, he found the edge of a heavy plastic tarp and the remnants of an old survey marker. Faded letters barely visible in red paint. Kelworth Mining Co. Evan's pulse tightened. He'd heard that name before, years ago in the news. An energy conglomerate accused of illegal dumping, quietly cleared after a lack of evidence. He folded the tarp, pocketed the marker tag, and looked down at Axel. The shepherd stood motionless, eyes fixed on the ground as if waiting for an order. "We're not digging," Evan said. "Not yet." Axel didn't move. His gaze drifted to the horizon, where thunder rolled again across the hills. That night, Evan drove down to the nearest town, a half-hour stretch of winding road where fog clung to the pavement like smoke. He stopped at a diner on Main Street, a place called Barnes and Daughters Cafe, its neon sign flickering weakly. Inside, the smell of burnt coffee and fried eggs filled the air. A woman sat at the counter reading an old geological journal, her grey hair tied back with a pencil. Evan recognized the name embroidered on her jacket, Clara Barnes. He approached slowly. "You're Clara Barnes?" She glanced up, suspicious. "Depends who's asking." "Evan Cole. I think you worked with Captain Lewis Grant about 15 years ago. He used to talk about a survey project up in these mountains." Her expression shifted, wariness mixed with memory. "Grant," she repeated quietly. "I haven't heard that name in years. You knew him?" Evan nodded. "He saved my life once. I found his old notes up by the ridge. Said something about an anomaly under the mountain." Clara set her coffee down. "Anomaly?" He slid the weathered map across the counter. "This." Her eyes flicked over it quickly. She drew in a slow breath. "That's his handwriting. I helped him draft the early geological models. We were looking for rare mineral veins. He thought there was something unique about the magnetic readings. But after he sent the final report, everything went quiet. Next thing I knew, he was gone." "Did you ever find out why?" Clara shook her head. "He called me once, said he'd found a deposit that shouldn't exist. A rare composite, something not natural. Then he mentioned Kelworth. After that, nothing." Evan felt his stomach tighten. "Kelworth Mining." She nodded grimly. "They tried to buy him out. When he refused, they pulled the permits. He said he'd hidden proof somewhere safe. Said his dog would make sure no one touched it." Evan looked out the window. Rain streaked the glass, blurring the streetlights. "He meant Axel." Clara frowned. "You found the dog. He's still there, guarding the place." For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then she leaned closer. "Listen to me, Mr. Cole. If Grant hid evidence of what they were doing, Kelworth won't stop until they recover it. They've bought off entire counties before. You need to be careful." Evan folded the map. "What exactly did he find?" She hesitated. He believed they were burying toxic material inside the rock seams, something military grade. If that's true, the groundwater beneath the ridge is poisoned. That means the entire valley's at risk. Evan's jaw clenched. "And you're saying they covered it up?" "I'm saying they erased everyone who could prove it," Clara said quietly. "Including Grant." Outside, thunder cracked again, shaking the windows. Evan's mind raced. The pieces were falling into place. The buried pipe, the mining marker, the letter. The truth wasn't buried treasure. It was buried guilt. He paid for the coffee, thanked Clara, and stepped back into the rain. Axel waited by the truck, rainwater glistening off his coat. The dog looked up as Evan opened the door. "She was right about you," Evan said, settling behind the wheel. "You were guarding something real." Axel rested his head on the window frame, eyes scanning the road ahead. Halfway up the mountain, the truck's headlights caught movement near the tree line, a silhouette darting across the road, too fast to be a deer. Evan slowed. Another shape appeared, then another. Men, wearing rain gear, hauling equipment toward the ridge. He killed the lights and watched through the downpour. Axel growled, deep and steady. Evan whispered, "They're back for what's under us." The shepherd leaned forward, muscles tensed, waiting for the next move. The rain fell harder, drumming against the hood like gunfire. Evan felt that old pulse again, the one that came before every mission. Except this time, he wasn't the soldier being sent to guard someone else's secret. He was the one uncovering it. And beside him, a dog who had never stopped guarding the truth lifted his head toward the mountain, ears twitching at the faint mechanical hum rising from deep beneath the earth. Something down there was alive. Or worse, waiting to be awakened. The night fell heavier than usual, clouds pressed low, swallowing the ridge in silence. Evan sat by the dying fire outside the shack, sharpening a pocket knife more out of habit than need. Axel lay nearby, eyes half closed but never fully asleep. Every few minutes his ears twitched, turning toward the forest like radar. The mountain air was colder, the kind that carried sound differently. Every snap of a twig felt closer, every gust sharper. Around midnight, Axel's head jerked up. The low rumble came seconds later, an engine, deep and deliberate, crawling up from the southern slope. Evan froze, listening. Another joined it, then a third. His stomach tightened. He grabbed the binoculars from his bag and climbed onto the porch. Down in the valley, through the fog, 3 black SUVs crept along the narrow logging road. No headlights, no plates, just dark shapes moving in unison, like predators that already knew the scent of their prey. Axel stood, muscles coiled, fur bristling along his back. A low growl built in his chest, controlled but powerful. Evan lowered the binoculars. "You were right, boy," he whispered. He scanned the forest again, counting the distance. They'd parked just beyond the old mining path, less than a mile away. Shadows stepped out, 6, maybe 7 men, flashlights low, rifles slung tight to their bodies. One of them carried a scanning device that pulsed faint red through the mist. They weren't hikers or hunters, they were professionals, Kelworth's people. Evan's jaw clenched. He'd seen their kind before, private security units dressed up as contractors, used for cleanup jobs that didn't make it to the news. He ducked inside the shack and pulled out the cedar box from under the floorboards. The documents, the photos, the coordinates, everything Captain Grant had left behind. If these men found it, it would all disappear. Axel paced near the door, restless. His instincts screamed of danger. "Easy," Evan murmured, sliding the box into his backpack. "We move before they do." He killed the lantern and looked outside again. The forest below flickered with faint red dots, their laser scanners sweeping through trees. They were searching for something buried, just like he had been. Only now, they were getting closer. Evan checked the pistol he'd kept locked away since leaving the Marines. He hadn't planned to touch it again. But the sound of those engines had brought back an old rhythm, the one that made his breathing slow, his thoughts precise. He felt Axel's eyes on him, steady and sharp. "You and me, partner," he said softly. They slipped into the dark, heading north toward the rocky ridge above the creek. The mist swallowed them whole. Evan moved without sound, Axel gliding beside him like a shadow. The smell of oil and exhaust grew stronger as they neared the clearing. Then came voices, male, low, cautious. "Command says the signal came from this area," one said. "Find the access point and burn it." A pause. Another voice, colder. "Grant's dog was spotted here once. If it's still alive, shoot it." Axel stiffened. Evan felt the tremor run through the dog's frame, a mix of anger and recognition. He pressed a hand to Axel's neck. "Not yet," he whispered. They crawled behind a boulder overlooking the clearing. The men were unpacking equipment, drills, metal detectors, soil probes. In the glow of their lights, Evan saw the Kelworth insignia stitched on their sleeves, half hidden under black tape. He scanned the faces. One stood out, the leader, tall, clean-cut, with a scar tracing his cheek. Evan had seen that face before, years ago in a photo Grant kept in his journal. Marcus Rena, head of Kelworth security operations. The man who'd last been seen with Captain Grant before he disappeared. Evan's pulse thudded in his ears. "Son of a bitch," he muttered. Rena's voice carried clearly through the rain. "Dig here. The sensors read hollow under 12 feet. Whatever Grant hid, it's under us. And keep the noise down. Locals don't need to know we're here." Evan watched them unpack the auger drill, its steel head gleaming in the flashlight beam. They were minutes away from breaking ground. He turned to Axel. The dog was locked on them, eyes burning. "We can't let them find it," Evan whispered. Axel looked back at him, tail stiff, the faintest rumble in his chest. He understood. Evan circled wide through the trees, moving toward the parked SUVs. Rain slicked the mud, masking his steps. He opened the first trunk. Thermal imaging gear, jerry cans of fuel, explosives. Enough to erase the ridge. Axel appeared silently at his side, drenched but alert. Evan grabbed one of the jerry cans and poured a line of fuel under the nearest vehicle. Axel waited, muscles taut, as if remembering old training drills. When Evan gave a sharp whistle, the shepherd bolted across the clearing, barking once, a perfect distraction. The men turned instantly, shouting, "There, the dog!" Evan lit the fuse on the flare and tossed it under the SUV. The explosion ripped through the night, bright and deafening. The shockwave rolled up the hillside. Axel darted back into the trees, vanishing into smoke. Chaos erupted. Rena yelled orders. "Find them! The dog and whoever's with it, now!" Evan sprinted through the underbrush, heart hammering, the flare light flickering off wet leaves. Axel reappeared beside him, limping slightly but unhurt. They pushed through the forest until the sound of engines faded behind them. When they finally stopped, breathless, the sky above the ridge glowed faint orange from the burning SUVs. Evan leaned against a tree, gasping. Axel sat next to him, watching the fire spread. "You just bought us time," Evan said between breaths. Axel's chest rose and fell, steady again. The glow reflected in his eyes made them look like molten gold. Evan looked back towards the valley, jaw tight. Rena would come again. They'd lost their vehicles, not their purpose. And if they'd found the hollow reading in the ground, they were closer than ever to the truth Grant had died to protect. He rested a hand on Axel's neck. "They're not walking away with it," he said quietly. "Not while you're still standing." Axel lifted his head, sniffing the wind. Somewhere below, faint sirens echoed from the town, a delayed reaction to the explosion. The mountain trembled softly, as if something deep within it had stirred awake. Evan stared into the dark, realization sinking in. They hadn't just uncovered a crime, they'd triggered a countdown. The shadows weren't returning. They had never left. The first hint came with the smell, thick, acrid, unnatural. Evan was burying the last of Captain Grant's documents inside a hollowed-out rock behind the cabin when Axel's head snapped toward the tree line. The dog's ears rose, nostrils flaring. A low growl rolled from his chest, deep and deliberate. Evan froze. Then he saw it, a faint orange shimmer behind the pines, dancing like fireflies. But it wasn't light, it was flame. He ran to the front of the shack, heart pounding. Through the fog, shadows, moved, men in dark jackets carrying torches and fuel cans. One shouted something, and in an instant, the night ignited. Fire crawled up the porch posts, spreading fast along the dry wood. "Son of a bitch!" Evan hissed. Axel barked once, sharp and urgent. "The pups!" Evan turned. Through the doorway, smoke was already spilling inside. The three small shapes were trapped in the corner, whimpering. Without hesitation, Axel lunged forward, vanishing into the haze. Evan shouted, "No, Axel!" But it was too late. The dog reappeared seconds later, carrying one pup in his jaws, his fur singed, eyes streaming. He dropped the puppy near Evan and dove back in again. Evan's throat tightened. He grabbed a blanket, wrapped it around his face, and followed him in. The heat hit like a wall. Through the smoke he could just make out Axel's silhouette, low, determined, dragging another pup by the scruff. Evan snatched up the last one himself and stumbled out the door. The cabin behind them groaned, timbers splitting under the weight of the fire. Axel emerged again, coughing, front paw limping but head high. Evan dropped to his knees beside him. "You're insane," he said, voice breaking. The dog licked the soot from one of the pups and nudged it towards him, as if to say the mission wasn't over. Flames spread across the roof, sparks raining down. The roar of the fire drowned out everything. Evan looked toward the southern ridge, the path marked on Grant's old map. The tunnel entrance, if it still existed, was their only chance. He strapped the pack with the remaining documents across his back and scooped the pups into his coat. "Come on, soldier," he said, gripping Axel's collar. "We're not dying here." They sprinted through the clearing, the fire chasing their heels. Behind them, the shack exploded in a shower of embers as the roof collapsed. Gunfire echoed, a warning shot from the men below. Evan and Axel dove behind a fallen tree. A bullet hissed through the smoke above their heads. "They're trying to bury us and the truth," Evan muttered. He pointed towards the ridge. "We go down. Now." They slipped through the brush until they reached the old creek bed. The tunnel was hidden behind a curtain of vines, half collapsed but still open enough for a man to crawl through. The smell of damp stone and old air hit him as he pried the vines aside. "Go," he said. Axel hesitated, nose twitching, then moved first, sliding into the darkness. Evan followed, clutching the pups tight. The tunnel was narrow, the walls slick with moisture. Smoke seeped in behind them, mixing with the scent of earth and metal. The fire above grew louder, a living thing devouring everything they'd known. The tunnel shook as part of the cabin collapsed. Dirt rained down from the ceiling. Evan ducked low, coughing. "Keep moving," he called out. Ahead, Axel barked once, guiding him through turns, checking every corner before moving forward. The sound was the only thing keeping Evan's mind from splintering. He followed that rhythm, one bark, one breath, one step at a time. A sudden gust of air hit them from deeper in the passage. The tunnel widened, revealing a chamber carved into the mountain's heart. Broken equipment littered the ground, old drilling rigs, rusted canisters, and sealed crates marked with faded government insignia. Evan's flashlight beam caught the word hazardous stenciled across one of them. Grant had been right. Evan knelt, trying to catch his breath. He found it. He whispered. They were dumping waste here. Axel's paw pressed against his leg, drawing his gaze. The dog's flank was bleeding where a piece of debris had grazed him, but he stood tall, eyes steady. He wasn't leaving yet. A new sound rippled through the tunnel, metallic clanging, voices echoing faintly from above. The men had followed. Evan switched off the light. The darkness swallowed them whole. "Quiet," he breathed. Axel didn't move. Even his breathing softened, almost synchronized with Evan's. Through the silence, the intruders' voices grew clearer. "They went underground," one shouted. "Seal the exits!" panic flickered at the edge of Evan's mind, but he pushed it down. "We're not getting trapped here," he whispered. He turned to the back wall. The map had shown a second exit, deeper inside. If it was still open, it would lead them out near the ravine. He guided the pups into his pack and motioned forward. Axel led again, despite the limp, tail low, body angled like a soldier clearing a corridor. Every few yards, he stopped to listen, nose twitching at the faintest air current. The air grew hotter. Smoke had found its way inside. Evan's throat burned. Somewhere behind them, a section of tunnel collapsed, sending a shockwave through the ground. The noise sent the pups squealing, but Axel pressed close, calming them with a soft grunt. They reached the far end at last, a narrow gap barely wide enough to squeeze through. Evan shoved the backpack first, then crawled behind it. The rocks scraped his shoulders, the weight of the mountain pressing down. He could hear Axel behind him, claws scratching stone, breath labored. "Almost there," Evan said, voice hoarse. The tunnel opened suddenly, spitting them out onto a ledge overlooking the valley. Cold night air rushed in, washing away the smoke. Evan fell to his knees, gasping. Axel stumbled out after him, collapsing beside the pups, sides heaving. Below them, the cabin burned like a beacon. The entire ridge glowed orange, fire licking at the sky. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, but they were far too late. Evan looked at Axel, who was licking his burnt paw, wincing but silent. The dog's fur was matted with soot, but his eyes were alive, bright and defiant. "You saved them," Evan said softly. Axel looked toward the fire, ears twitching at the crackle, as if saluting what they'd lost. Evan followed his gaze. The cabin was gone, but the truth Grant had died for wasn't. It was buried deeper now, safer maybe, but still burning, just like the ridge. He rested a hand on Axel's shoulder. "We hold the line," he whispered, "until the fire dies." The dog pressed his head against his hand, steady and resolute, and as the flames raged above them, man and dog waited in the echoing dark, 2 soldiers guarding the last breath of truth beneath a mountain built on lies. The deeper they went, the older the air became, heavy, stale, full of secrets that hadn't seen light in decades. The tunnel narrowed, then opened again into a carved stone chamber. Evan raised his flashlight. The beam caught the faint glint of metal, glass, and steel cases stacked against the far wall. "Grant," he whispered, his voice swallowed by the cavern. The place looked less like a mine and more like a hidden lab. Scattered across a central table were sample jars filled with mineral cores, sealed vials of murky liquid, and folders stamped Department of Defense, classified. Some of them had Kelworth's insignia scratched out with a knife. Axel padded forward, nose twitching. The dog moved carefully, avoiding debris, then stopped in front of a recording device half buried under dust. Evan crouched, brushed the dirt off, and clicked it on. A low crackle filled the room, followed by a voice, hoarse, steady, and unmistakable. "This is Captain Lewis Grant," the voice said. "If you're hearing this, I'm probably gone." Evan's throat tightened. Axel tilted his head, ears flicking as the tape continued. "Kelworth isn't mining minerals. They're dumping. The composite core under this ridge is unstable. Breach it and the groundwater collapses. If they find this, the water will die, and the mountain will fall. I left proof, samples, maps, everything. The dog knows where to look." The tape hissed, then cut off abruptly. Evan sat there, the weight of the words pressing on his chest. He looked around. The sealed samples, the corroded drills, the yellowed papers. Grant hadn't been searching for fortune. He'd been trying to stop a catastrophe. He picked up one of the folders. Inside were photos of seismic scans, jagged red lines streaking beneath the ridge. Notes in the margins read, "Cavern collapse probability. 89%. Another page detailed chemical markers of heavy contamination in the water table. Evan exhaled shakily. They weren't mining for profit, he said under his breath. They were burying their crimes. Axel barked once, sharply. His head turned toward the passage behind them. Evan instantly killed the flashlight. The tunnel fell into darkness. He could hear it now, the echo of boots, distant but getting closer. The rhythmic thud of trained steps, careful, tactical. Rena's men, he whispered. Axel's body tensed, nose pointing toward the sound. The pups whimpered softly in Evan's pack. He pressed them, closer against his chest, and motioned the shepherd down. Axel obeyed, crawling silently to his side, the perfect soldier again. Evan looked around the chamber for another exit. There was none. Only the way they came, and the hum of something faint beneath their feet. He turned back to the equipment, scanning for anything that could carry evidence. His eyes landed on an old metal case labeled Field Recorder, Geological Data. He opened it. Inside was a portable hard drive, blinking faintly with residual power. Still alive. Evan muttered. He slid the drive into his pocket, then gathered a few vials, the topographic maps, and Grant's notes. Each one could expose Kelworth's cover-up. Each one was worth killing for. The footsteps drew closer. Voices now. Muffled but clear enough to make out. Sector 3 cleared. Thermal shows movement ahead. A man said. Evan turned to Axel. We can't fight in here. We'll bring the truth out. The dog's tail dropped low, but his eyes stayed locked on Evan, ready. Evan grabbed his lighter and a rusted flare from the crate. He twisted the cap, igniting it in a burst of orange light that filled the chamber. The sound of shouts echoed immediately from down the tunnel. Go, Evan said. Axel herded the pups into motion, barking once, a short, commanding sound that made the air vibrate. Evan followed, sprinting toward the narrow crawl space at the chamber's edge. Behind them, gunfire cracked. Sparks burst across the rock wall. Evan dove flat, clutching the pack, crawling through the dirt as bullets shredded the air behind him. The tunnel groaned with every shot, dust falling like ash. Axel crawled ahead, panting but focused, his burnt paw dragging slightly. Then, another explosion. A sharp, concussive blast that shook the ground. The flare must have ignited one of the old canisters in the chamber. The shockwave tore through the tunnel, hurling Evan against the wall. He coughed, dazed, blinking through the dust. Behind him, the entrance collapsed in a roar of falling stone. Silence followed, broken only by Axel's ragged breathing. They were cut off from pursuit, but also from the only exit they knew. Evan crawled forward, following the faint trickle of air on his face. The tunnel sloped upward. Axel barked once again, softer this time, as if to guide him. Evan reached for the wall, feeling the cool draft. He looked down at the dog. You're leading us out, aren't you? Axel glanced back, tail twitching, then moved ahead again. The tunnel twisted left, then right, until a faint shimmer appeared ahead, a patch of bluish light filtering through cracks in the stone. Evan pushed through and broke into another chamber. This one was smaller, carved into the base of the ridge. And there, half buried in dust, sat a generator connected to a relay panel labeled Kelworth Research Node B. Dozens of wires ran into the rock. It was still active. Evan approached carefully. The panel hummed, tiny, lights blinking red. He reached for the console, wiping off grime until the monitor flickered on. The screen showed live geological readings, depth scans, seismic patterns, time stamps dated just days ago. Kelworth hadn't abandoned the project. They were still drilling, somewhere deeper. Jesus, he whispered. They're already under the valley. He hit the record function on Grant's old device and began reading aloud. voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. Captain Lewis Grant's notes confirm the contamination and structural risk beneath the Appalachian Ridge. Data from Kelworth Node B proves active drilling in violation of federal law. If this footage is found, it must reach the Bureau of Land Management or the Department of Justice. Behind him, Axel growled again. Low, warning. The tunnel echoed with movement once more. Debris shifted. They'd survived the blast. Evan turned off the recorder, pocketed it, and met Axel's gaze. "We take it to the surface," he said, "no matter what." Axel stepped closer, muzzle brushing Evan's sleeve, eyes burning with the kind of trust only earned in battle. The two locked eyes, soldier and sentinel, the last link in a chain forged by men who refused to stay silent. The ground trembled again. Far off, the sound of engines reverberated through the rock. Rena's team wasn't retreating. They were bringing heavier equipment. Evan tightened the strap on his pack. "You ready, partner?" Axel's tail gave one short thump. Then he turned toward the darkness ahead, leading the way up through the twisting tunnel. The light behind them faded as the mountain shook once more, fire, noise, and betrayal chasing them upward. And between each echo, the only sound that mattered was Axel's steady breath, pulling them both toward the truth, waiting above the ridge. The tremors came first, small, rhythmic, unnatural. Evan stopped mid-step, pressing his hand against the rock wall. Axel froze beside him, ears pointed back, body stiff as wire. The pups whimpered in the pack. Then came the unmistakable echo of boots, dozens of them, bouncing off the tunnel walls. "They found us," Evan whispered. Axel's growl was low, rising from deep in his chest. Dust fell from the ceiling with each approaching footstep. The men were close, too close. Evan switched off his flashlight. The darkness was total. He knelt beside Axel, resting a hand on the shepherd's shoulder. "We hold them long enough to get out. That's it." Axel turned his head, eyes catching the faintest glint of light from Evan's wristwatch. It was enough. The dog's tail gave a single, deliberate sweep. Ready. The first flashlight beam broke through the dark behind them. Voices followed. "They're ahead. 2 targets, man and dog." Gunfire erupted, echoing like thunder through the tunnel. Evan dove behind a rock outcrop, clutching the pack tight. Bullets sparked against the walls, sending shards of stone raining down. Axel bolted sideways, darting into the shadows like a ghost. His bark sliced through the chaos, sharp, commanding, designed to draw attention. It worked. 3 of the mercenaries turned their fire toward the sound. Evan used the opening to move, sliding behind another formation of rocks. He fired once, hitting a lantern on one of their belts. The explosion sent fire licking across the tunnel floor. Screams followed. "Push forward!" Someone yelled. "Don't let them reach the ridge!" Axel reappeared from the smoke, launching himself at a man rounding the corner. The shepherd hit hard, jaws locking on the attacker's forearm, dragging him down. The man's rifle clattered away. Evan caught a glimpse of Axel's teeth glinting in the firelight, his muscles straining as he fought to hold the man back. "Axel, down!" Evan shouted. The dog obeyed instantly, releasing and darting clear just as Evan fired. The mercenary dropped. The tunnel was a storm of smoke and flame now, visibility nearly gone. Evan grabbed the pack again, slinging it over his shoulder. "We're out of time," he muttered. Axel limped slightly. His side grazed, blood dark against his golden coat, but his eyes stayed locked on Evan, alert and unwavering. They ran deeper into the passage, turning sharply into a secondary shaft. Behind them, the mercenaries regrouped, firing blindly through the smoke. The echo of boots drew closer again. Evan stopped beside an old dynamite crate left from Grant's survey team. His mind clicked into soldier mode. Fast, precise, automatic. He ripped a fuse line, tied it to the crate, and jammed a flare into the ignition. The flame hissed to life. "Go, Axel, go!" Axel hesitated, sensing the danger. Evan shoved him forward. The dog barked once, protest or farewell, Evan couldn't tell, then darted toward the exit, guiding the pups ahead. Evan turned and ran after him, heart pounding. The roar of fire behind him mixed with the hiss of the fuse. Just as they reached the bend, the explosion ripped through the tunnel. The shockwave lifted Evan off his feet. Heat slammed into his back as debris rained down. He landed hard, gasping, the sound of collapsing rock roaring in his ears. When the world finally steadied, everything behind them was gone, buried under tons of stone. The way out lay ahead, a thin slit of moonlight at the far end. "Come on," he said hoarsely. "Almost there." Axel limped up beside him, breathing hard but still moving, nudging one of the pups back into the pack when it stumbled. They climbed through the final stretch, crawling until they burst out onto the open ridge. The night air hit them like a flood. The forest below was on fire. The blast had triggered the old gas pockets. Flames rolled up the slope, turning the mountain into a living inferno. Evan collapsed to his knees, coughing. Axel dropped beside him, chest heaving. For a moment, neither moved. Then, through the roar of the blaze came a new sound, a low thump-thump of rotor blades. Evan looked up. A helicopter was descending through the smoke, its spotlight cutting through the chaos. He shielded his eyes. "Who the hell?" A voice blared through a loudspeaker. "This is Agent Hannah Reeves, FBI. Stay where you are." Evan blinked in disbelief. Reeves. The name hit him like a memory. She'd once questioned him months ago about Kelworth's missing shipments. The helicopter hovered lower, wind whipping the flames aside. 2 agents rappelled down, rifles scanning the perimeter. One of them ran straight to Evan. "Sergeant Cole," she shouted over the roar. "You're lucky we tracked your distress signal." "I didn't send one," Evan yelled back. Reeves jumped down beside him, eyes darting between the burning ridge and the bleeding dog. "Then someone did." Axel barked once, low and deliberate, looking toward the wrecked tunnel entrance. Through the flames, for a split second, Evan thought he saw movement. One last figure stumbling before vanishing into the collapsing rocks. "Grant?" he whispered, but the image was gone. The agents helped him up, guiding him towards the chopper. Reeves grabbed the pack from his shoulders and glanced inside. Her expression changed when she saw the documents and samples. "My God," she muttered. This is the evidence. Kelworth's operation wasn't mining. They were covering a spill." Evan nodded weakly. "They buried it under us." As they climbed aboard, Axel hesitated, looking back toward the ridge. His paw pressed against the dirt, his gaze fixed on the inferno below. It was the same look he'd given the cabin, farewell and duty all in one. "Come on, soldier," Evan said softly. "We did it." The shepherd climbed in at last, settling beside the pups. Reeves signaled the pilot, and the helicopter rose into the air. Below them, the ridge burned, a line of fire stretching across the mountain like a wound. The collapsed tunnel glowed red from beneath, each explosion marking the death of another secret. Reeves turned to Evan. "You realize this is going to bring down an entire corporation." He looked out the window, watching the flames consume the night. "Then Grant didn't die for nothing." Axel rested his head on Evan's leg, eyes half closed, chest rising slowly. Evan's hand found the dog's neck, fingers brushing through ash and dirt. "You're going to be all right, buddy," he whispered. The helicopter tilted north, carrying them toward the first trace of dawn. Behind them, the ridge flared one last time, lighting the sky like a burning truth finally exposed. And as the fire devoured the mountain, the only thing that refused to fall was the silent bond between the Marine and the shepherd, who would rather burn than leave the mission unfinished. 6 weeks after the mountain burned, the courtroom was silent enough to hear a pen drop. Rows of reporters filled the benches, their cameras forbidden, but their pens eager. The banner above the judge's bench read, United States District Court, Western Virginia. At the defense table sat Rena Voss, CEO of Kelworth Industries, her sharp suits replaced by a grey prison uniform. Her hair was tied back, her hands cuffed. The woman who once commanded an empire of greed now looked like a ghost. Across the aisle sat Special Agent Hannah Reeves, flanked by environmental investigators and 2 federal prosecutors. The air smelled faintly of dust and disinfectant. The trial was short, the evidence overwhelming. When the judge read out the charges, environmental sabotage, conspiracy, bribery, and manslaughter by negligence, Rena didn't blink. She just stared ahead, hollow-eyed, as if the words weren't meant for her. Then the projector flickered to life. Reeves stood and played the recovered footage from Grant's recorder. On screen, Captain Lewis Grant appeared. Dusty uniform, eyes tired but calm. "If they find this," he said, "the water will die and the mountain will fall." The courtroom froze. Every word cut through the air like glass. Grant's voice carried the weight of every man who'd been silenced before him. Then came the final seconds of the recording. A flicker of Axel, tail wagging faintly beside the crates. The audience murmured, "A dog in a soldier's story." But Reeves knew better. She'd seen him in action. That dog had done what most men couldn't, guarded the truth when no one else would. Rena's attorney tried to object, but it was futile. The hard drives, the vials of contaminated soil, and the seismographic data all told the same story. Kelworth had been burying toxic waste beneath federal land, falsifying geological surveys, and bribing officials to keep it quiet. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, Rena slumped forward. The judge's gavel echoed once, sharp and final. Outside the courthouse, snow began to fall. Reporters swarmed around the steps, microphones thrust forward. They wanted a statement from the man who had uncovered it all, the former Marine, Evan Cole. But Evan didn't show. He'd already left the city before dawn, driving north through the fog with Axel resting in the passenger seat. His leg was bandaged, and his fur had started to grow back where the burns had been. Every few miles, the dog turned his head towards the passing tree line, ears twitching at unseen sounds. They stopped by a frozen lake at the edge of the Appalachian Ridge, the same ridge where it all began. Evan stepped out of the truck, the cold air biting at his face. He looked toward the mountain, charred, scarred, but still standing. Snow covered the blackened trees like a shroud. Axel limped out beside him, his gait uneven but proud. He stood still, nose raised to the wind. For a moment, Evan thought he saw the old determination in those amber eyes, the same fire that had carried them through hell. A week later, a letter arrived at the FBI's Richmond office, addressed simply to Agent Reeves. It had no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper written in Evan's clean, deliberate handwriting. He wasn't just guarding the mountain. It read, he was guarding the truth. No signature, only a small paw print at the bottom. Axel's. Reeves read it twice before setting it on her desk beside the recovered patch from Grant's uniform. She smiled faintly, then looked out the window toward the distant Blue Ridge. The news spread fast across the region. The federal cleanup crews discovered underground chambers filled with contaminated barrels, each stamped with Kelworth's logo. Dozens of officials resigned. Grants and restitution funds were established for the towns whose wells had been poisoned. And yet, amid the legal aftermath and the media frenzy, what people talked about most wasn't the scandal or the verdict. It was the story. The story of a Marine and a shepherd who stood alone against an empire. Local hikers began leaving small wooden signs along the ridge, carved with a single word, Guardian. Someone painted a mural in the nearby town of Fairview, a black and gold shepherd standing before a burning mountain, its eyes fixed on the horizon. They called the place the Guardian's Ridge. By spring, the forest began to heal. Grass pushed through ash. Birds returned. And at dawn, those who passed near the ridge swore they sometimes heard the faint echo of a bark carried through the mist, steady, sure, protective. Back in a small cabin far from town, Evan sat on the porch, watching the sunrise. The pups, now strong, their coats thick and bright, played near the fence. Axel lay in the shade, one paw stretched forward, eyes half closed but alert as ever. Evan poured a cup of coffee, set it beside him, and said quietly, "You did it, buddy. He'd be proud." Axel's ears flicked. He didn't move, just watched the horizon as the first light of morning broke over the ridge. In the distance, the smoke had cleared. The mountain stood silent once more, no longer hiding a secret but holding a legacy. And for those who knew the story, silence was no longer just the absence of sound. It was respect. It was truth. It was the sound of a guardian still watching over the mountain. 1 year later, the mountain had changed, but it had never lost its silence. Spring melted the last of the ash into soil, and the ridge, once charred black, now shimmered with wildflowers. A single wooden cabin stood on the slope, rebuilt over the same foundation where everything began. Its porch faced east, overlooking the valley where mist rolled like a living thing. Evan Cole sat on that porch with a mug of coffee in hand. His hair had grown longer, streaked with silver. The lines around his eyes spoke of peace more than pain. Beside him, Axel lay stretched out on the boards, his once burned paw now a faint scar. His fur gleamed under the morning light. 3 grown shepherds, the pups that had once fit in Evan's arms, played in the yard below, chasing one another through the dew-soaked grass. The mountain was alive again. From the road, the hum of an approaching van broke the quiet. It wound its way up the trail until it stopped in front of the gate. A group of college students stepped out, clutching cameras and tripods. One of them, a girl with dark curls and a denim jacket, walked forward nervously. "Mr. Cole?" she asked. "We're from Blue Ridge University. We're making a short documentary about the Guardian's Ridge, the story of the soldier and the dog." Evan smiled faintly. "That's what they're calling it now?" She nodded, eyes bright. "Everyone around here knows about it. The town even put up a marker near the old site. We wanted to hear it from you. What really happened up there?" Evan leaned back in his chair, taking a slow sip of coffee. Axel lifted his head but didn't move, his gaze following the students with quiet curiosity. "You've come a long way for an old story," Evan said. One of the boys, adjusting his camera, spoke up. "Maybe, but some stories are worth keeping alive." Evan's eyes softened. "You're right about that." They set up their equipment on the porch, the morning fog wrapping the ridge like a thin veil. The camera's red light blinked to life. The girl asked softly, "So who was the Guardian? Captain Grant? You?" Evan looked down at Axel. The dog's ears flicked at the sound of his name, tail thumping once against the floorboards. "No," Evan said finally, voice low but steady. "You're looking at him." The girl blinked, following his gaze to the shepherd resting at his feet. Evan's lips curved into the faintest smile. He didn't bark for food. He barked for the truth. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the wind moving through the trees. The students glanced at one another, their expressions changing from curiosity to quiet respect. The cameraman zoomed in on Axel, his muzzle grey now, eyes amber and calm. Behind him, the ridge stretched endlessly, bathed in pale sunlight. Evan went on, his tone carrying the weight of a man who had learned to make peace with his ghosts. People think soldiers guard borders, or flags, or orders. But sometimes the hardest thing to guard is what's right, what's true. Grant knew that. Axel never forgot it. Neither did I. The girl's voice trembled slightly. Do you ever regret it, staying here? Evan looked out across the valley. The forest swayed gently in the wind, 1,000 shades of green whispering back. No, he said quietly. Some places aren't meant to be left behind. They become a part of you. He reached down, brushing his hand along Axel's neck. The old dog leaned into the touch, eyes half closing in contentment. The younger shepherds barked playfully in the distance, chasing each other through wild lupines. Besides, Evan added with a small grin, someone's got to keep an eye on this mountain. The students smiled. One of them wiped a tear before it could fall. The girl turned off the camera, but the silence that followed felt sacred, like they had captured something that couldn't be spoken aloud. As they packed their gear, Evan handed her an old patch, the same one Captain Grant had worn. The fabric was faded, the stitching loose. Keep it, he said. Let people remember the kind of men and dogs that stand their ground. She nodded, clutching it as if it were a relic. Thank you, Mr. Cole. We'll make sure the story's told right. When their van disappeared down the trail, Evan leaned back in his chair again. The sky had shifted to gold, sunlight pouring over the ridge. Axel stirred, pushing himself up slowly, joints creaking. He walked to the edge of the porch, sat down, and stared toward the mountains. His chest rose and fell with steady rhythm, the way it had always done when he stood guard. Evan watched him, eyes glinting in the light. Still on duty, huh? He murmured. Axel didn't look back. He didn't have to. His ears twitched, catching the distant sounds of wind, birds, and something deeper, the pulse of the land itself. The camera that had been left running on the porch caught the image. A weathered marine and his shepherd side by side, framed against a landscape reborn. The shot lingered on Axel, eyes locked on the horizon as if waiting for something unseen. Then came the faint sound of a bark, soft at first, then echoing through the valley. It wasn't a warning, it was a promise. The screen faded to white, and the words appeared. He didn't bark for food, he barked for the truth. The sound of wind rose again, carrying a final echo from the ridge, Axel's bark mingling with the mountain breeze, a heartbeat that never stopped. Text faded in over the last frame. What's your story with a loyal pet? And as the image dissolved, the channel's emblem appeared, a German shepherd silhouette beneath the words, For every hero with 4 paws, subscribe to support more true stories of loyalty, courage, and the bond that never dies.